or C. August Dupin, and we are here to recall a great man, poet, and dreamer. Once upon a midnight journey, while I pondered weak and weary, deep into darkness peering, long I stood there, wondering, fearing, doubting, dreaming dreams no mortal had ever dared to dream before. Open then I flung the shutter, when with many a flirt and flutter, in there stepped a stately raven, of the saintly days of yore. Quoth the raven, nevermore. You may recall these lines from the greatest poem of America's Shakespeare, Edgar Allan Poe. Edgar was born January 19, 1809. He became an orphan, a widower, a lover, and a great man. He faced troubles in the face of darkness and despair, but despite that pain and darkness, true genius can be seen. Never in all of my years have I faced a more honorable and difficult task than writing a eulogy for the most dedicated, strong, poetic dreamer I have ever known. Through the horror story of his life, the great man found the inspiration to compose his poetry. He lived and led the 19th century as a poet and a writer. And now, all that remains of him is the creation of thrilling mystery and a haunting selection of masterfully renovated stories and poems. I am most certainly not a detective. I am most certainly not a poet, but my good friend left me a few tidbits of wisdom on his craft. I would define it in brief, poetry of words as being the rhythmical creation of beauty, as he once said. He believed that the structure of poems should be built very specifically toward a single goal and then used as conduits of beauty. Beauty is a feeling, an effect, the atmosphere and the essence of a poem whose purpose is to haunt the reader's soul, causing art through poetry, poetry through beauty, and beauty through structure. He also completely renovated the way the short stories were written. Beforehand, to give you a picture of the short story before his renovations, this, if you wanted, could be considered a short story in his time because it may have only taken you a little time to write. This is an example of what was flawed and illogical about the short story before Edgar Allan Poe. He encouraged the practice of using every single word of a short story to tell the story, using every word to let the spirit of the story haunt your soul and cloud your senses as masterpieces free your imagination. He once said, "If any literary work is too long to be read at one sitting, the affairs of the world interfere in everything like totalities at once destroyed. What my dramatic friend meant if a short story is too long, it becomes utterly worthless." Edgar led a revival in the way that short stories and poetry is written. I am a detective, and I have solved many, many cases over the years, some to prove innocence, some for money, some for amusement, but all using fascination or deduction, as Sherlock Holmes would say. We both search in between the lines, not for what is, but for what is not. Using this, I can get inside the mind of a criminal and predict his first move before he even knows what it is. And I have solved many, many cases. But one was different from all the rest, the real-life case of the beautiful cigar girl, on which Poe's story, The Mystery of Marie Roget, is based on. Young Mary Cecilia Rogers was born in New York City. She was raised by her widowed mother, and when she was 17, she took a well-paying job at John Anderson's tobacco store. Their lives proceeded as usual until October 5th, 1838. The newspapers reported Mary's terrified mother finding her suicide note. She was utterly terrified, but a few days later, Mary returned, supposedly having been visiting a friend in Brooklyn. And the newspapers, once again, not working to further the cause of truth, says that the whole affair was a publicity stunt of Glenn Fleur. However, 3 years later after that event, Mary went again to visit a friend, but this time her body was found in the Hudson River. The police suspected that she had had an abortion that failed and consequently led the abortionist to dump her lifeless body in the river. As suspects piled up for this case, even I was befuddled. But Edgar Allan Poe kept on trying to solve it, each time failing to explain his events, and the memory of the beautiful cigar girl was swept away. But this event shows his dedication to the truth and to humanity. But the only real mystery to me is the passing of my dear Edgar. As we all well know, he was found drunk and delirious on the streets of New York City and died 3 days later on October 6, 1849, just before his marriage to Sarah Elmira Royster, whom he was first engaged to in college. He gave no sign as to what may have killed him. But really to comprehend and to cope with Edgar's death, you must understand that all you see is but a dream within a dream, and such all that you hear but the siren's wails of that very dream. This proves that everything is not always as it seems, and that the only true mystery is why, after poverty, after attempted suicide, after death, and after tragedy, the greatest man in the world continued to reign. Edgar lived and led the 19th century as a writer and a poet, and he led by using the horrors and addictions of his life to create the jewel of his legacy. And the jewel of his legacy is The Raven, a poem that you may know. Once upon a midnight dreary, while I pondered weak and weary, over many a quaint and curious volume of forgotten lore, suddenly I heard a tapping. Surely, said I, surely that is something at my window lattice. Let me see then what thereat is in this mystery explored. Let my heart be still a moment in this mystery explored. 'Tis the wind, and nothing more. Open here I flung the shutter, when with many a flirt and flutter, in there stepped a stately raven, of the saintly days of yore. Not the least sound made he, not a minute stopped or stayed he, but with air of a lord or lady perched above my chamber door, perched upon a bust of Pallas, just above my chamber door. Perched he sat, and nothing more. And the raven, sitting on this placid bust, spoke only one word, as if his soul in that one word he did outpour. Nothing farther than he uttered, not a feather than he fluttered, till I scarcely more than muttered, other friends have flown before. On the morrow he will leave me, as my hopes have flown before. Then the bird said, nevermore. Be that word our sign of parting, bird or fane, I shrieked upstarting. Get thee back into the tempest and the night's Plutonian shore. Leave no black token, as a lie thy soul hath spoken. Leave my loneliness unbroken. Quit the bust above my door. Take thy beak from out my heart, and take thy form from off the door. Quoth the raven, nevermore. And the raven, never flitting, still is sitting, on the pallid bust of Pallas, just above my chamber door, and his eyes have all the seeming of a demon's that is dreaming, and the lamplight o'er him streaming throws his shadow on the floor, and my soul from out that shadow that lies floating on the floor shall be lifted nevermore. The Raven is a legendary poem that made the genius behind such a masterpiece a legend himself. This poem showed Edgar's fears, his weaknesses, and the terror he saw in his own nightmare of a life. When he was just 2, his father left his family, and the terror and grief of the Raven became a reality for the 2-year-old at his mother's bedside when she died, December 8, 1809. As more tragedy struck, he was completely destitute at his college, and his secret engagement to Sarah Royster had been called off by her father. And as a final straw, he fought with his stepfather and left. As would happen in the life of a great poet, he began expressing his deep feelings through his art, which brought fame, but often left him in total poverty. And as would happen in the life of a great alcoholic, his poverty increased and his losses continued, but he strove on to provide for his new wife, Virginia. Edgar led by using the horrors and addictions of his life to create the jewel of his legacy. Men have called him a demented madman, but it is not yet settled whether madness is or is not the worthiest genius, whether beauty and glory and all that is good does not spring from the disease of thought, from a mood of mind supported only by a lack of common sense, from a freed imagination. That is what madness really is, a truly freed imagination. And to call a man who lost 6 loved ones to tuberculosis demented is utterly redundant. The next time you see a raven, write a poem, read a short story, watch a murder mystery, or even read one of Edgar's works, remember the man who used those things to free your imagination. Edgar's monuments, museums, and works can be seen in many public places. My good friend left his mark on us, and his mark connects us to our future and our present in literature. Edgar Allan Poe lived and led the 19th century as a poet and a writer. He was dedicated, strong, a poet, a dreamer, and a genius. And for all these reasons, he's a great man. Now, the godfather of the original detective fiction and the renovator of stories and poems is gone. May you all write and dream and remember Edgar Allan Poe.